Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're going over a new poll out of the state of New York that shows what the matchup looks like between Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul and Republican Elise Stefanik, the U.S. representative, in this potential matchup. So in this article from the New York Post, which is written by Vaughn Golden and Kevin Sheehan on August 12th, they say that Kathy Hochul leads Representative Elise Stefanik by only 14 points in a hypothetical matchup for New York governor, according to a new Siena University poll released on Monday. While still a hefty lead, it is the smallest gap between Hochul and a potential GOP challenger since then Representative Lee Zeldin trailed Hochul by only 11 points just 3 weeks before the 2021 general election. Hochul would go on to win by only 7 points. So, what they're saying is in Siena's polling, this is the closest matchup that they have seen thus far. Stefanik can highlight that more than a year out from a potential matchup, Hochul's lead over Stefanik is only 14 points, 45 to 31%, down from 23 points in June, and that Hochul doesn't hit that magic 51% mark, Siena Poll spokesperson Stephen Greenberg said. The poll results come as Stefanik has seemingly consolidated the GOP field should she pull the trigger on a gubernatorial run following Hudson Valley Congressman Mike Lawler's official exit from the race last month. Stefanik also had some other bright spots from the Siena poll. She eked out a few points over Hochul among independents, 35 to 32% respectively. Stefanik is also one among suburban voters, those from Suffolk, Nassau, Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam counties, 51 to 39%. Or 41 to 39%, excuse me. Zeldin has similarly been leading among those two constituencies in October of 2021. Asked about her struggles in the suburbs and among independents, Hochul waved off this poll. "I've got my plate full. I let all the pundits figure out the polls," the governor told reporters. "It's my 16th election. I've been through countless polls, and guess what, team? There's going to be a lot more between now and next November," Hochul added. A fifth of those polled weren't familiar with Hochul or Stefanik. Stefanik clearly has room to grow with voters, either positively or negatively. While 49% of voters say they are very or somewhat familiar with her, 46% are not or are very not at all familiar with Stefanik, Greenberg said. The latest Siena poll is catastrophic for Kathy Hochul as she is losing independent voters to Elise Stefanik, is below 50% on the ballot, and is only 35% of voters want to re-elect Kathy Hochul, as voters are increasingly looking to Elise Stefanik to deliver new leadership, Stefanik advisor Alex DeGrosse wrote in a statement. Hochul once again suffered from underwater favorability ratings this quarter. The respondents rated her 42% favorable to 44% unfavorable. The Democrat has had negative favorability ratings in 9 of the last 10 Siena polls that have been taken. Asked if New York is on the right track or heading in the wrong direction, 41% said right track, as opposed to 45% who said it was heading in the wrong direction. So that's the article from the New York Post. So this is a very interesting poll here, because in the governor's race right now, Kathy Hochul, first to be the Democratic candidate again, has to defeat her own Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado, who is running against her, in large part due to the fact of Kathy Hochul's approval ratings and Delgado believing she is open or potentially vulnerable to a primary challenge. Now, Hochul does have the endorsement of the Erie County Democratic Committee, 4 U.S. representatives, including House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, and New York Representatives Tom Suozzi, Pat Ryan, and Gregory Meeks. And now it should be worth noting that in the only poll that's been taken thus far, in that Siena University poll, Hochul was leading over Antonio Delgado 50 to 15%, so it looks like Kathy Hochul should not have too much of a problem surviving the Democratic primary. And the other polls from Siena back in June that had also Richie Torres included, Torres is not running in the primary, it showed Kathy Hochul with a healthy lead over Antonio Delgado in those polls as well. So I think Kathy Hochul is going to be all right in surviving the Democratic primary. Now, on the Republican side of things, it's very interesting. For a while, it looked like Mike Lawler, the U.S. representative from the 17th district, was going to run for governor. And then about a month or so before his decision, we started getting reports that Elise Stefanik, the U.S. representative, has expressed interest in running for the race. And President Trump put out some statements essentially endorsing Lawler and Bruce Blakeman, another potential Republican candidate, for re-election here. This is what the Wikipedia article says. In May of 2025, President Donald Trump endorsed Lawler and Blakeman for re-election to their current post, quote, in what experts say is a not-so-subtle attempt to clear the field for upstate Congressman Elise Stefanik to get the GOP nomination. And that seemed to work. On July 23rd, Mike Lawler announced that he would run for re-election to Congress. In an interview with Fox and Friends, he said, quote, "There is no doubt that Hochul is the worst governor in America, but after months of deliberating over this and really working through it, I've decided the right thing to do for me and my family and my district is to run for re-election." So it's possible Bruce Blakeman could decide to run, as well as John Castellaneta and Betsy McCaw. But Elise Stefanik, the U.S. representative, if she decides to run, she is going to be the Republican nominee in all likelihood. As the second she enters this race, President Trump will endorse her, and that will essentially put the Republican primary to bed. Now, currently only one Republican, Carl Hyde Jr., is in this race. But again, if Stefanik runs, she should win that Republican primary without any issue. What the polling looked like before Lawler and Blakeman ruled out a run: the Sienna poll from back in June showed Stefanik at 35%. Lawler had 18 and Blakeman had 7. The Sienna poll from before that in May, very similar numbers: 35 for Stefanik, 22 for Lawler, and 11 for Bruce Blakeman. Other internal Republican polls like Coefficient had Stefanik up by a lot, by over like 50 and up to 60 points. Coefficient poll from back in May showed Stefanik leading by a large number. Gray House as well also showed Stefanik leading by large numbers. So unless Stefanik decides not to run or Kathy Hochul gets upset in the primary, we're probably going to see a governor's race of Kathy Hochul versus Elise Stefanik. And this could be very interesting. Right now, the political predictions from Cook Political Report, Saboteur's Crystal Ball, and Race to the White House all have this race listed as likely for the Democrats. Inside Elections has it as a battleground. Now, Hochul in her campaign has mentioned that she has remained optimistic in her ability to win re-election, banking on her campaign on the hopes that many New Yorkers will feel pain from President Trump's cut to the federal workforce and tariffs. But this race could potentially be close. Now, the early polling between Hochul and Stefanik has not essentially been super close depending on which poll you're looking at. Sometimes it has been, sometimes it hasn't. From those three Republican polls, Gray House showed it a 6-point race. Coefficient showed it only a 1-point race, 43-42, which is very close. Harper polling showed 50 to 39, an 11-point race. But Sienna, I would say, is the most well-known and I would say generally respected of the polls done so far. And Sienna had 47 to 24 back in June. Now it has 45 to 31, with 20% still undecided. So there's a few things going on here in this. For one, the appetite for change from Kathy Hochul seems to be there in New York. In the Siena University poll, 35% of respondents said they would vote for Kathy Hochul, 53% would rather vote for a different candidate. But for Hochul versus Stefanik, Kathy Hochul gets up to 45%, Elise Stefanik has 31%, 3% other, 20% undecided. So just the math there is more than enough undecided vote out there for Elise Stefanik to actually defeat Kathy Hochul in the race. That's the good news for the Republicans. And we also know that Kathy Hochul is probably going to get more than 45%, and Elise Stefanik will definitely get more than 31%. When these polls show that like 20% of the vote is undecided, that's what they show right now, but it's also tricky because when you look at the recent election results in the state of New York, you can kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. So at the presidential level, just to give you a reference here, let me just refresh the page here. The cursor is being a little weird here. In New York, Kamala Harris got 55.9%, Donald Trump got 43.3%. That is what it ended up being. And I think we could probably expect that Elise Stefanik will get probably at least 42, 43% at the absolute lowest in this race. Now, Kamala Harris got up to 55%. Back in 2020, Joe Biden got up to 60.87%. Trump only got 37.74%. Now, at the governor level, in 2022, it was actually a very close race. Kathy Hochul got 53.2%, but Lee Zeldin was able to get up to 46.8% in a very competitive election. Where before that, 4 years prior, Andrew Cuomo, before he resigned, won his re-election by 23.4%. So New York's going to be very interesting to watch for in 2026, because was 2024 a sort of wake-up call, and 2022, where Kathy Hochul is so unpopular that it's going to be a very close race again, or is there actually the potential that New York could potentially be a battleground state at the governor's level, or will New York just go back to its safe Democratic identity of the past few years? It's going to be very interesting to watch for. When you look at the overall map for New York, I'll pull up the 2024 presidential map here. New York's going to be interesting because obviously New York City creates a lot of Democratic votes in this state, and it's going to be hard for a Republican to make up the margins, even if they're running relatively strongly compared to what 2022 was. Trump lost to Harris by about 13 points, and that was still the best a Republican has done in the state in a very long time. Now, the governor level, there is a better chance of it being a Republican win than the presidential level. For some reason, governor levels in American politics are more likely to vote for the party that the state is usually not in charge of at the state or at the Senate and presidential level. So Stefanik should have a better chance in the governor's race than, say, Trump did in the presidential race. But it's going to be interesting to watch. Looking at areas in New York City, like in Brooklyn, like Manhattan, like in Queens, can Stefanik cut into some of these margins at the 2024 level and try and match them or exceed what Lee Zeldin got in 2022? Stefanik, also being from upstate New York, can she improve in some of the margins, like in counties like Dutchess County or Ulster or Columbia or Rensselaer, these places that voted for Kamala Harris in 2024? Can Stefanik make inroads in these areas? Can she make inroads in Monroe, where Rochester is, or Erie, where Buffalo is, or Onondaga, where Syracuse is? Can these areas be cut into the margins by Elise Stefanik, or is Kathy Hochul going to survive and win here? It's going to be interesting to watch. Right now, for the 2026 governor's map, I currently have New York listed in the likely Democratic category. This is in between a 5 and 15% margin of victory. That's where I have it going right now. I think it's certainly very early on in the process. And until we get closer to the election, we won't have a really accurate look at how close this race could be, because there's the potential this race could end up being a very close race, like under 5% margin of victory, or it could even be an over 15-point blowout. We really don't know how it's going to go until we get more clarity on this race. But this poll shows that Kathy Hochul is leading. It's obviously very good news for her that she is leading by 14 points, but the fact there is a lot of undecided votes out there should give Democrats a little bit of pause, and we have to wait and see how that all will unfold. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts, and hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the New York City Mayoral Election for 2025, where Democrat Zohran Mamdani leads Andrew Cuomo by 19 points, while in the same poll it talks about Kathy Hochul versus Elise Stefanik. Now, I'm not going to be covering the governor's race that much in this video, as I just did a video prior to that that'll be up on the channel as well. So if you want to check out the governor's race poll, you can go check that video as well. This one's mainly going to just focus on the New York City mayoral race. So looking at this poll, the governor's race did go 45-31 at the governor level. Now, for the mayoral race, I'm going to pull down here just to get the numbers here. Things are looking much better for Zohran Mamdani now. However, in Sienna's first polling data about the general election for New York City mayor, the sample size was small. New York City voters made up only 317 voters in the overall poll, and there's a margin of error of 6.7%. So that is significant. That is a much higher margin of error and a smaller sample size than most polls. But it did find that Zohran Mamdani led by 19 percentage points among registered voters over Andrew Cuomo, who ended up being in second place. Now, Mamdani also commanded the support of a majority of Democratic voters in the poll. However, Cuomo still led the pack of the four candidates, which also includes Republican Curtis Sliwa and incumbent Mayor Eric Adams, among Black and Jewish voters, with whom Mamdani underperformed in the Democratic primary. The poll highlighted a significant generation gap, with Mamdani leading Cuomo by 49 percentage points among voters 18 to 34, but Cuomo trailing by 6 points among voters 55 and older. Siena College also polled Mamdani's statewide favorability for the first time statewide, with surveyed voters had a negative view of the Democratic nominee, with 37% having an unfavorable opinion and 28% having a positive one. A fairly strong plurality of those in New York City had a favorable view of Mamdani. His name recognition is still not as high as Cuomo's, but the former governor has an even lower favorability rating than Mamdani, with a majority of 61% of voters polled holding a poor opinion of him. That includes majorities across parties and ideologies among both statewide in New York City voters. So that's the interesting part here. And let me just see if they give the exact numbers on the mayoral race. If not, I'll go to the Wikipedia page where I know they have it. The article does not mention it. But it is interesting that also on the policy front, Siena found that registered voters were split on the proposal to change the state constitution to permit mid-decade redistricting should another state do that first, which is also being discussed right now. The poll for the New York City mayoral race in the 2025 election found that Zohran Mamdani had 44% of the vote. Andrew Cuomo is in second place at 25%, Curtis Sliwa was in third at 12%, and Eric Adams was in fourth at 7%. Now, again, a 317 voter sample size is obviously very small, and a 6.7% margin of error is obviously very large. So let's just go through this, all right? So 6.7% margin of error, you could essentially say that for Zohran Mamdani, he could be anywhere from 51% down to about 37% or so for Mamdani. Where Cuomo, at 25%, he could go up to around 32%, but he could also fall down to roughly about 17 to 18% or so for Cuomo. Curtis Sliwa, doing that same exercise, could be around 19%, or he could be down to about 5%, and Eric Adams could literally go up to 14%, or he could literally fall down to 0. And Jim Waldron was not included in this poll. 10% are still undecided. So this race is very interesting. This poll from Siena University, I would say, is the most well-known pollster of the polls that have been conducted thus far, and at least for a pretty long time now. It does show that even with the small sample size and margin of error, that the trends of this race continue, which is in the four-way contest, the way the race is currently going, between Mamdani, Sliwa, Cuomo, and Adams. Zohran Mamdani is the clear leader at this current point in time, and if nothing changes, Zohran Mamdani will become the next mayor of New York City. And it also confirms another trend over recent weeks, which is that Andrew Cuomo, running an independent campaign, is currently the second-place finisher and runner-up to Zohran Mamdani. The problem for Cuomo is, depending on the poll, he's running usually pretty considerably behind Mamdani, anywhere from 10 to 20 points usually in the poll, which Cuomo is doing well enough to make this a competitive race, but not well enough to actually come realistically close enough to catch Mamdani in this current race right now. Another trend is Curtis Sliwa, the Republican candidate, is running in third place, and he's taking anywhere from about 10 to 20% of the vote away from the third-party vote, trying to stop Zohran Mamdani. Make no mistake, if Curtis Sliwa dropped out of this race, that 12% in this poll would almost all go to either Andrew Cuomo or Eric Adams. If Adams were to drop out of the race as well, it would probably almost all go to Cuomo to try to stop Mamdani. But Curtis Sliwa and Eric Adams at this current point in time do not really have a plausible path to beating Zohran Mamdani in a general election. Mamdani is already starting out in this poll at 44%, Cuomo at 25%. Just adding the math up in this race, that would bring them to what? About 79% or so, I believe, if I'm doing the math correctly here, of the race. I just want to fact check this. I want to get this sure. I don't want to give you incorrect information here. 69%, I'm sorry. 69% of the race vote is caught up between Mamdani and Cuomo. So that only leaves 31% of the vote left to be up for grabs for Sliwa, Adams, and Waldron at that point. So even if one of the candidates got all 31% of that vote, it would not be enough to catch Zohran Mamdani. It would be enough to catch Cuomo, but A, that wouldn't happen, and B, the math just isn't there. So the trend of the recent polls shows that Curtis Sliwa and Andrew Cuomo and Eric Adams are all splitting the anti-Zohran Mamdani vote. And the simple fact is that with all four of them in the race, no one candidate can drop or can get to Zohran Mamdani's number and actually give him a realistic chance at losing, assuming Mamdani gets around that low 40% mark that he's been getting in recent polling. And this is certainly consistent with other polls. Now, the conversation we've had in other videos is, what if one of Sliwa or Adams or Cuomo were to drop out of this race and support the other? Well, Cuomo said a few weeks ago that he believes the candidate that's leading around the beginning of September should be the candidate to take on Mamdani, and the other two candidates should drop out of the race and support them. Now, Cuomo is saying that, obviously, as he is currently in second place in pretty much every single poll that's taken, but Curtis Sliwa and Eric Adams have been very adamant they're not getting out of the race, and they've even started to attack Andrew Cuomo as someone that essentially should not be running, and is for his time as governor and all the scandals that surrounded him. So, at least for right now, it doesn't seem like Sliwa and Adams are going anywhere, and that hurts Andrew Cuomo as the only candidate in this race that can realistically have a chance at getting to Mamdani's level. Let's say, hypothetically, Curtis Sliwa and Eric Adams did both drop out of this race, though. Well, they combined in this poll for about 19%. So if you add 20 points to Cuomo, that would get him to 45%, minus 1 would be 44. Adams and Curtis Sliwa, if they all coalesced around Cuomo, would tie Zohran Mamdani at that point 44 to 44, and then that 10% undecided would essentially decide who becomes the next mayor of New York City. And that's the reality of this race right now, is if the candidates can make some sort of agreement for the 2 out of the 3 to get out of the race and support one of them against Zohran Mamdani, in the Andrew Cuomo scenario, Cuomo can, it seems based on the math, catch Mamdani and maybe defeat him. For Sliwa, if Cuomo and Adams dropped out and endorsed him, there's not enough math there. There was a recent poll of Curtis Sliwa versus Zohran Mamdani. Let me find it here. I believe it was a little bit more further down here. I thought I saw it. But it shows that Mamdani is going to defeat Curtis Sliwa. Yeah, here it is, 53 to 35 in the Wick poll. Sliwa does not have an actual path to becoming mayor of New York City, and all he's really doing is just splitting the Mamdani vote. And I don't know if President Trump's going to try and weigh into this race again to drop out. Curtis Sliwa so far has been adamant he will not be dropping out of this race and that he'll become the next mayor of New York City. It's not going to happen. He's not going to come close to winning, but that's what he believes at this current point in time. Eric Adams right now is not really in a much better situation than Curtis Sliwa. Depending on the poll, he's arguably in a worse situation. Adams is so unpopular among New York City voters. He's getting 7% of the vote in this poll, which again is nowhere near being close enough to come to Zohran Mamdani's level, and he's taking votes away that would likely all go for Andrew Cuomo in this election as well. If Adams alone dropped out and it was Mamdani versus Cuomo versus Sliwa, well then if Cuomo got up to 32%, Mamdani would be at 44% and Sliwa would be at 12%. Then if all the undecided vote went to Cuomo, Cuomo would still lose by 2%. Mamdani would still probably win, but there would be a better chance if Mamdani's voters don't turn out to vote as much, which again is a very big if, given how much they turned out to vote in the primary, but it would give them a better chance for Cuomo at winning this race. But it shows right now there is such a big effort to try and stop Zohran Mamdani in this race, and yet Zohran Mamdani at this current point in time still seems very likely to become the next mayor of New York City because the third-party candidates cannot coalesce around one candidate to run against him. And splitting the anti-Zohran vote among 3 candidates, or even 4 if you include Jim Waldron, it's not mathematically possible to stop Zohran Mamdani at this current point in time. The numbers just aren't there. If they were to drop out and coalesce around one candidate, like we've seen in some polls where it's Cuomo versus Mamdani and a head-to-head, it's usually a 1 or 2 point race, and then the undecideds make the difference. When it's Eric Adams versus Zohran Mamdani, it's more competitive than Sliwa versus Mamdani is, but usually it involves Mamdani defeating Adams 43 to 36, whereas Curtis Sliwa versus Zohran Mamdani does not really have a chance at winning. So this race really does not change much from this poll. It only confirms the fact Zohran Mamdani is leading in a head-to-head of Mamdani versus Cuomo. Cuomo could potentially beat him, but the way the race is currently going, we're likely not going to see that, as the other 2 third-party candidates cannot get out of their own way, and will probably give the mayoralship to Zohran Mamdani. Which, if you're a supporter of Mamdani, that's certainly very good news. If you're a supporter of any of these other candidates, it's obviously not good news. But that's where things stand on that front. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we have some news out of the state of Florida and out of Tampa, where Republican governor of the state, Ron Desantis, has chosen Tampa's own Jay Collins to be lieutenant governor of the state of Florida. And this article from the TampaBay.com and the Tampa Bay Times talks about who he is, and I have my own personal thoughts about this that could potentially be interesting for 2026. So, a little bit earlier on Tuesday, Republican Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, has named his new lieutenant governor, Tampa Republican Senator Jay Collins. DeSantis on Tuesday appointed Collins as a lieutenant governor, a largely ceremonial position that has been vacant since February when former Lieutenant Governor Jeanette Nunez left the post to become the president of Florida International University. Collins, who is a former Green Beret, hasn't ruled out running for governor in 2026. His appointment could indicate that DeSantis, who is term limited, may support the Tampa senator as his chosen successor in the 2026 race. At a news press conference Tuesday at the Tampa Green Beret Association Team House, DeSantis said he was looking for someone that is capable of serving and leading as governor if that need were to ever arise. DeSantis and Collins did not take questions at the news conference. "I want you to know that as your lieutenant governor, I have your back," Collins said. "I'll fight to defend each and every one of you, whether you were going to vote for me or not. The lieutenant governor is second in line if the governor steps down or can't complete their term, but has few statutory designated duties beyond that. The lieutenant governor makes around $135,000 annually. Collins has been a long, close ally of Governor Ron Desantis and was elected to the Senate in large part due to DeSantis' endorsement. His appointment means there will be 3 vacant seats in the Senate. To fill Collins' seat, DeSantis would have to call for a special election. Now, there's some things about Collins as well. DeSantis was his early supporter. Collins was born in Montana, where he grew up in poverty. His dad lied while he was in high school, and he has said his dad died, while he was in high school, and he has said he at times lived in his car or crashed on couches. He was adopted by his grandparents. Collins enlisted in the U.S. Army and joined the Special Forces and received a Purple Heart for his service. He moved to Florida with his wife as a veteran in 2019 after their military service to raise their 2 sons. After initially living in Pasco County, Collins and his family moved to Tampa. In 2021, Collins launched a campaign for U.S. Congress, challenging Democratic incumbent U.S. Representative Kathy Castor in a heavily Democratic district. About a year after jumping into the race, Collins switched to run in the more Republican-friendly 15th District. A month later, Collins switched races again to run with DeSantis' endorsement for the Tampa area state Senate, the seat that he won. DeSantis endorsed Collins even though the state's Republican Senate leadership had already spent tens of thousands of dollars in support of another Republican candidate. The Senate leadership-backed candidate, former Rep. Sean Harrison, withdrew from the race. Collins has been proven loyal to the governor after DeSantis earlier this year called for an immigration special session that legislative leadership opposed. Collins ran one of the governor's bills and opposed a plan unveiled by Senate and House Republican leaders. DeSantis also has endorsed Collins' wife, Layla Collins, who last year ran unsuccessfully for a Hillsborough County School Board seat. DeSantis recently appointed Layla Collins to the Florida State Board of Education. When it comes to working with the state, in addition to being a state senator, Collins works as chief operating officer for Operation BBQ Relief, which has received more than $13 million from the DeSantis administration to provide meals to people affected by hurricanes. In that job, he makes about $212,000 a year per his latest financial disclosure. Collins has also assisted the state in its mission to evacuate stranded Americans caught in the fray of the Iran-Israel conflict. In 2023, when Florida chartered similar flights to evacuate people out of Israel following the deadly October Hamas attack, Collins helped connect the state with group putting together resources. In June, the Florida Division of Emergency Management worked with Gray Bull Rescue, which Collins has been assisting from the Middle East to fly people out of the region. As a medic in Green Beret, Collins was deployed in 2007 to Afghanistan, where he sustained injuries that led to his leg being amputated. He spent more than 20 years in the U.S. military. DeSantis has previously said Collins is, quote, like an action figure. Now, it also goes into some of the bills he's sponsored and his support for gun legislation as well, but for the purpose of today's video, that's pretty much the gist of it. Collins has been a very long-time ally and supporter of Governor DeSantis. Now, this is interesting because being the lieutenant governor obviously sets up the possibility that Jay Collins could run for governor in 2026, where Ron DeSantis is term limited per Florida's state law. He cannot seek a third consecutive term, and Ron DeSantis has been a very popular governor in the state of Florida among the Republicans in the state, and the question is who will be the next governor after him. Now, Florida has become much more of a Republican state in recent years, so we can expect a Republican governor will probably win in 2026. The question is, who will that be? Well, U.S. Representative Byron Donalds of Florida's 19th District, which I do believe takes up large parts around Naples in the Florida area. Donalds represents this district right here. I'm missing here. It's Florida 19 down here. He won it by 32.6%, Florida 19th. So Donalds right now, and he also has the endorsement of President Donald Trump, starts out as the early favorite in this race. He already has the endorsement of several key people, including executive branch officials from Scott Bessent to Dan Bongino, Doug Burgum, Kelly Loeffler, all throughout the Trump administration, and Florida U.S. Senator Rick Scott as well. Senator Ashley Moody has not made an endorsement in this race, but also not really too expecting one anytime soon either on that one. So Donalds is currently the favorite. Now, Charles Burkhart, the mayor of Surfside, Florida, is also running, but right now Byron Donalds is the likely Republican nominee in that race. The thing that everyone's waiting for is what will Governor DeSantis decide to do? Because Governor DeSantis has not yet endorsed Byron Donalds, and I would not bet on him doing so after DeSantis and Donalds had some heated, I believe, situations and conversations following the 2024 presidential campaign when Donalds and DeSantis, who were allies, Donalds endorsed President Trump very early in that campaign, and DeSantis obviously was upset by that. And now there seems to be a little bit of bad blood between Donalds and DeSantis. So DeSantis has been rumored now to potentially be backing someone else in this race other than Byron Donalds. And the rumor for a while has been that his wife, First Lady of the state of Florida, Casey DeSantis, has been publicly expressing interest in running for governor and that she may decide to run for this race. But now with Jay Collins appointed as lieutenant governor of Florida, obviously DeSantis wanted an ally of his to be lieutenant governor. So this doesn't 100% mean that Casey DeSantis won't run for governor in 2026. But having Jay Collins be the lieutenant governor and potentially be able to run for governor could be like a backup plan if Casey DeSantis decides not to. Now, obviously, DeSantis, if she does decide to run, obviously Jay Collins would not run against her, as Collins is very close to Governor DeSantis and First Lady Casey DeSantis and would not do that. But if Casey DeSantis decides she did not want to run, I would expect Jay Collins would decide to run and he would receive the endorsement and all the support of Governor DeSantis. The way the race is currently going at this current point in time with hypothetical polling shows that for Casey DeSantis versus Byron Donalds, it's actually a very competitive race, where in the most recent poll from the University of North Florida from the middle of July, it showed Casey DeSantis leading Byron Donalds by about 3 points. Now, still a good number of undecided voters at 18%, but DeSantis starts out with a 3-point lead. In the St. Pete polls, very popular poll in the state of Florida, it showed Byron Donalds getting 35%, Casey DeSantis starting out 27.4%, so around 27%. So still around a 7-point race in that one, even with Donalds leading. Target market research poll from back in May showed it a 1-point race for DeSantis versus Donalds. Fabrizio Lee and Associates, which is one of President Trump's top pollsters, showed it a 4-point race between Donalds and DeSantis on the first round of voting on that one. So this is very interesting that if DeSantis and Donalds face off against each other, it shows a very close race that Casey DeSantis very well could win. Now, I think a large part of this is the fact that Casey DeSantis, being Governor DeSantis' wife, is very well known in the state and has likely very high name recognition and is also probably very well liked in the state of Florida. Jay Collins, though he's now the lieutenant governor, would not probably be as well known statewide and he would not have the DeSantis name, so he would probably not start out with the same levels of support that Casey DeSantis would. That doesn't mean if the primary between Byron Donalds and Jay Collins happened that Collins could not win, but I think he would have less of a chance at winning than Casey DeSantis would due to the fact that Casey DeSantis is the governor's wife and is super well known. Where Collins would probably start out with smaller name recognition, though he does have some time to try and get his name ID up. So this Republican primary is going to be very fascinating to watch in the state of Florida, whether Casey DeSantis or Jay Collins decides to run against Byron Donalds in 2026. But I would bet on one of them certainly running against Byron Donalds in that election. Now for the general election, Democrat David Jolly, a former Republican U.S. representative from the 13th District, is running. 2 other Democrats, Al Lawson and Angie Nixon, have expressed interest in running, and Daniela Levine Cava, the mayor of Miami-Dade County, is listed as a potential candidate. Several Democrats have already ruled out running, including Jason Pizzo, who is now running for governor as an independent. David Jolly's been getting the endorsement of several U.S. representatives and from the state of Florida, and it seems like right now he'd be the likely candidate to become the Democratic nominee. Jason Pizzo will be on the ballot as an independent, and this race is listed as solid Republican from Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, and Sabados Crystal Ball, and I honestly agree with these rankings. Only one poll from Victory Insights showed it a 6-point race between Donalds and Jolly, but there was also 32% undecided in that. Now for Donalds versus Levine Cava versus Pizzo, it's about a 4-point race. For Casey DeSantis, when her name's included, it's also a 4-point race, but it's also very early on from that one pollster, and still a very large percentage of undecided voters. Now, I don't think this race is going to be too competitive at the general election level, to be completely honest. In 2022, Ron Desantis won re-election by 19.4% against former Governor Charlie Crist, just 4 years after 2018, when it was a very close race between Ron DeSantis and Democrat Andrew Cuomo, where DeSantis won his first term in a very narrow election. But Florida has moved very far to the Republican direction in 2024, voting for Donald Trump by 13.1% in the presidential race, and in the Senate race, when the poll showed that Senator Rick Scott may be in trouble, he ended up winning by 12.8% in the Senate race. So Florida has certainly moved very far to the right, so much so it's been one of the most Republican trending states in the entire country. Just from 2020 to 2024, Florida moved 9.7% more towards the Republican direction by margin of victory from 2020 to 2024. From 2012 to 2024, Florida's moved 14 points towards the Republican direction. So Florida's becoming much more of a safe Republican state, and I think the governor's race will likely be the same. An independent candidate being in the race could play an interesting role. Maybe he takes away some Republican voters. I would bet on Pizzo, being a former Democrat, will probably take more Democratic voters away, but that could be something very interesting to watch for as well. As for the governor's race, my most recent 2026 governor's map prediction, I have the state of Florida listed as safe for the Republicans. Yes, the early polling data does not show that now, but once the election gets closer and the undecided voters start choosing which candidates they support, whether it's Donalds or Jay Collins or Casey DeSantis, I think we're going to see another Republican governor representing the state of Florida after 2026. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts on this video and any other video ideas you would like to see me go over. Again, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video.